In an age of saints and sinners, Formosus was neither. He was something far more dangerous, a man with too many enemies. Not enough time to die cleanly. Born in 816 in Ostia, Formosus entered the church not as a spiritual visionary, but as survivor. Rome was crumbling physically, morally, politically. The papacy, meant to be the guiding star of Christendom, had become a throne of poison. Passed between rival families and puppet popes like a chalice laced with venom, Formosus rose through the ranks fast. Too fast. By his 40s, he was Bishop of Porto, a prestigious seat second only to the Pope himself. He was brilliant, silver-tongued, and politically savvy. Trusted envoy for Pope Nicholas I, Formosus negotiated with kings, outmaneuvered archbishops, and even convinced the Bulgarian ruler Boris I to convert to Christianity, but with influence came fear. His critics accused him of ambition, cardinal sin for a man of God. Whispers spread that he desired the throne of St. Peter, that he conspired with enemies of the church, that he wanted to be emperor in 876. His reputation came crashing down. He was excommunicated by Pope John VIII. He saw his bandit of abandoning his bishopric, plotting with Frankish nobles and inciting rebellion. Formosus fled. For years he lived as a spiritual outlaw, surviving only through the shifting tides of papal politics. And then the tide shifted again, when Pope John VIII was bludgeoned to death with a hammer, a fitting end for a man nicknamed the Pope of Blood. Formosus returned to favor. In an age of saints and sinners, Formosus was neither. He was something far more dangerous, a man with too many enemies. Not enough time to die cleanly. Born in 816 in Ostia, Formosus entered the church not as a spiritual visionary, but as survivor. Rome was crumbling physically, morally, politically. The papacy, meant to be the guiding star of Christendom, had become a throne of poison. Passed between rival families and puppet popes like a chalice laced with venom, Formosus rose through the ranks fast. Too fast. By his 40s, he was Bishop of Porto, a prestigious seat second only to the Pope himself. He was brilliant, silver-tongued, and politically savvy. Trusted envoy for Pope Nicholas I, Formosus negotiated with kings, outmaneuvered archbishops, and even convinced the Bulgarian ruler Boris I to convert to Christianity, but with influence came fear. His critics accused him of ambition, cardinal sin for a man of God. Whispers spread that he desired the throne of St. Peter, that he conspired with enemies of the church, that he wanted to be emperor in 876. His reputation came crashing down. He was excommunicated by Pope John VIII. He saw his bandit of abandoning his bishopric, plotting with Frankish nobles and inciting rebellion. Formosus fled. For years he lived as a spiritual outlaw, surviving only through the shifting tides of papal politics. And then the tide shifted again, when Pope John VIII was bludgeoned to death with a hammer, a fitting end for a man nicknamed the Pope of Blood. Formosus returned to favor. His enemies had vanished. His charges were dropped, and in 891, against all odds, Formosus became pope. But the throne he inherited was not a blessing. It was a coffin. The Holy Roman Empire was fracturing. Italy was overrun with warlords. The very cardinals who kissed his ring now plotted his fall. He had escaped excommunication. He had survived exile, but death would not save him. In fact, death would only begin his punishment. By the time Formosus was crowned pope, Rome was already sick with factionalism, sick with fear, sick with rotting power. The papacy had become a battlefield between empires east versus west, Frank versus Byzantine, and worst of all, noble versus noble. Every bishop had a dagger. Every monk whispered rumors, and the Holy See was a throne with a bullseye carved into it. Formosus, trying to survive, aligned himself with Arnulf of Carinthia, the East Frankish king. He invited Arnulf to invade Italy and wrest power from Emperor Lambert of Spoleto. His family held Rome in a vice grip of corruption and cruelty. It worked briefly. Arnulf stormed Italy. Lambert fled. Formosus crowned Arnulf's Holy Roman Emperor. Securing his own position, But then, just days later, Arnulf suffered a stroke. His army crumbled. Lambert returned, and now Formosus was trapped. He had backed the wrong man. The revenge was slow, but it came. Formosus died suddenly in 896. No one knows exactly how. Some said it was poison. Others said it was a stroke, divine punishment, or pure exhaustion. Regardless, the church buried him with full honors in St. Peter's Basilica, encased in robes of silk, a ring of power on his finger, and the signet of Peter over his heart. But his enemies, especially Pope Stephen VI, Lambert's political puppets, were not satisfied. Greater than dead men can't be punished, Stephen said, but their bodies can. In a grotesque act of posthumous vengeance, Pope Stephen ordered Formosus' corpse exhumed, not quietly, not privately, but publicly for trial. Yes, trial. 9 months after burial, the one-sonered pope was dug from his tomb. The stench was unspeakable. His skin had sloughed off in patches. His hands were stiff. His face bloated, half collapsed. He was dressed again in papal robes, seated on a throne, and placed before a tribunal of sneering bishops. The charge? Perjury, treason, being pope while unworthy to make matters worse. A deacon was ordered to speak on his behalf to defend a corpse. The man wept during the trial, but Stephen, ranting and wild-eyed, screamed over him. Formosus was found guilty. Then, the mutilation began. It was called the Cadaver Synod. It remains one of the most grotesque spectacles in religious history. Imagine it, a rotting corpse, dressed in the holy robes of the pontiff, slumped in a throne before a court of vengeful priests. The air was thick with the sour. It began with chains, rusty iron shackles wrapped around the ankles of a corpse. Pope Formosus, bloated and putrid, was bound like a criminal, his legs bent backward unnaturally, as if death itself hadn't been enough to humble him, dragged through the streets of Rome like a warning. Like meat, the chains clinked against the stones as they pulled him, scraping bone, tearing what flesh was left from his rotting frame. Children screamed, dogs barked. Some in the crowd recoiled, others have watched, frozen, because this wasn't justice. This was ritual degradation. The church was supposed to be eternal, sacred, unshakable. But now, its highest office was being paraded through the mud, communicated after death, mutilated, and humiliated before the eyes of Christendom. And yet, Pope Stephen VI smiled. He smiled as if this cadaver could feel shame, as if somewhere Formosus' soul was watching, writhing in agony. His crime? Not heresy, not violence, but political miscalculation. Backing the wrong king, crowning the wrong emperor, dying before his enemies could finish their revenge. But even after the trial, the Cadaver Synodrome wasn't done with him. They needed a spectacle, and what's more degrading than a feast for dogs? Formosus' mutilated corpse was dumped like trash on the banks of the Tiber, bloated and waterlogged. There it lay, until the dogs came. The banks of the Tiber had seen blood before, but not like this. The body of Pope Formosus, once dressed in silks, once worshipped as the vicar of Christ, now lay half-rotted and sun-swollen, tangled in reeds and garbage. His flesh, already torn by dragging chains and clumsy blades, oozed into the earth. The river had rejected him, but something else had not. The stray dogs came at night. They were mangy things, feral, starving, their eyes glowing yellow in the moonlight. The scent of decomposition pulled them across alleys and fields until they reached him. They circled, they sniffed. They fed by morning, only fragments remained. Bits of bone, tatters of cloth, a gnawed femur gleaming white under the rising sun. Word spread quickly, not just of the desecration, but of its consummation. Greater than the Pope was eaten by beasts, they whispered. Rome fed its soul to the dogs. Some said it was divine justice, others called it a curse, but many believed the land itself began to change. After that, a sickness settling over the city, as if it had devoured something it could not digest. Priests grew ill, crops failed, lightning struck the church roof during Mass. And then, only a few months later, the screams began again. This time, It was Pope Stephen VI who was dragged through the streets not in death, but in terror. Imprisoned by his own guards, beaten by the mob, and finally strangled in his cell. Choking on the very air he once used to condemn the dead, Rome had turned on him. Greater than Formosus never forgave, they said, and now he walks the halls at night. Whether myth or madness, one thing became clear. The church had made a martyr of a corpse, and now they would never be rid of him. They thought it was over, that with the corpse eaten, the robes burned, the synod buried in shame, Formosus would vanish into memory, but Formosus, the dead pope, would not rest, because Rome could not stop talking about him. Whispers slithered through monasteries that his ghost walked the aisles of St. Peter's, head tilted, fingers missing. That water turned black where his bones had soaked. That those who watched his trial died within the year strangled, drowned, or burned. Greater than he has no tongue, a monk wrote in his journal, but I heard him curse. Then came the reversal. Pope Stephen VI was dead. His successor, Romanus, tried to erase the scandal only to be deposed within months. Then Theodore II, lasting barely 20 days, ordered the corpse of Formosus retrieved from the Tiber. Miraculously, it was found mostly intact, bones tangled in riverweed, eyes gone, but face recognizably his. He was reburied in the Vatican with solemn mass, but the church was broken. The people, traumatized. The ritual that was meant to disgrace had instead immortalized. Formosus became a symbol of corruption, of revenge, of how low the papacy could sink when politics trumped piety. He was a man whose most important acts came after his death, who ruled longer as a corpse than he did as a pope. And his trial, the Cadaver Synod, became a cautionary tale across Christendom. Not just about power, but about what we do to the dead when the living are afraid. Centuries passed, but the story of Pope Formosus only grew stranger, darker, more myth than memory. Rome tried to bury it physically and metaphorically. The records were edited, the names of bishops quietly erased. The Cadaver Synod was condemned by later popes as an abomination. But the stain remained, because you cannot unring a bell, and you cannot untree a corpse. Inside the cold stone walls of St. John Lateran, where the trial had taken place, monks whispered of shadows moving at midnight. The papal throne, they claimed, creaked when no one sat in it. Candles blew out on their own, greater than I walked past the nave. One monk wrote in a secret letter, "I swear to God I saw a man missing 3 fingers raising his hand to bless me." Pilgrims visited the site not in reverence, but out of dread. Artists painted the scene again and again. Formosus, in his decaying grandeur, slumped on his throne, his hollow sockets watching the living. He became a symbol of divine punishment, not just for his accusers, but for the entire church. It wasn't just Catholic shame, it was Christian rot. And as the Middle Ages wore on, tales of corpses on trial became more common. Heretics were burned posthumously, witches were exhumed for execution. It was as if the Cadaver Synod had unleashed a new theology, one where death no longer protected you. Formosus had been a man, then a pope, then a corpse, then a weapon, and even. Now, in the vaulted silence of Rome's cathedrals, his name carries weight. Not as a saint, not as a sinner, but as a warning. The Vatican never officially recognized it, but for generations. The ghost pope haunted its darkest corners. Pilgrims told of seeing a robed figure slumped, silent, kneeling before the altar at midnight mass. Priests spoke of wind rushing through locked corridors, of unseen footsteps across marble floors. Always 3 knocks, never 4. A cruel echo of the 3 fingers Stephen VI had severed in underground crypts. Novices whispered a single name before sleep, greater than Formosus. To speak, it was to invite a nightmare. In private, some clergy admitted they feared his wrath, not for what they had done, but because they knew it could happen again. That anyone having a pope could become a puppet in death. Paraded and condemned for politics, pride, and paranoia. In some versions of the legend, Formosus never left the river. His spirit floats under the bridges of Rome, watching the papal. Guards cross at night. In others, he is said to rise every year on the anniversary of the Cadaver Synod. His skeleton, still dressed in red and gold, to deliver a curse in silence. Greater than he who defiles the dead, the legend says, shall one day speak to no one yet answer to all. The Vatican tried to cleanse the stain. They built new altars, painted over frescoes, held quiet services of reparation. But in every dark hallway, every shadowed cloister, Formosus lingered, not a man, not even a martyr, but a memory too grotesque to fade. He had become eternal. The trial of Pope Formosus was never about theology. It was a feast of vengeance, one in which the Church turned on itself like a starving beast. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most shameful, bizarre, and horrifying spectacles in religious history. But beneath the rotted skin, the broken bones, and the ceremonial desecration lies a deeper truth. This was not just about a man, it was about power. Formosus had made enemies. He had crowned emperors, shifted alliances, pulled at the fragile strings that held the Holy Roman Empire together. When he died, his enemies saw an opportunity not to correct him, but to erase him. Not just politically, but spiritually. Completely strip him of dignity, strip him of memory, strip him of peace, and in doing so, they exposed the rot at the heart of the Church. They weaponized ritual, perverted justice, made a mockery of death and sanctity. And worst of all, they invited others to do the same. After Formosus, no corpse was safe. Heretics were dug up and burned. Censors were punished long after they had drawn their last breath. The Church became not a shield, but a sword. And yet, the horror backfired. The grotesque nature of the Cadaver Synod horrified even its participants. Pope Stephen VI died in disgrace. His successors tried to undo the damage, but the memory could not be washed away. Greater than once you put a dead man on trial. You admit the living no longer feel safe. Today, the trial is studied in hushed tonza. Footnote. In textbooks, a macabre curiosity in Vatican history. But it deserves more, because the true horror wasn't the mutilation, or even the dogs. It was that the world watched cardinals, kings, commoners alike. Cain chose to believe the madness made sense. The story of Pope Formosus is not just a grotesque tale from medieval history, it is a warning that when power is absolute, not even the grave can protect you. That silence, complicity, and fear can twist justice into horror. And that memory, like corpses, can be dragged back into the light mutilated, mocked, and misunderstood, but it can also survive. 9 months after death, Formosus stood trial, but centuries later, he still speaks. The true horror was never in the flames or the blood. It was in the silence of the crowd, and how easily a lie became truth. Have you ever heard of a darker fate than this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more forgotten horrors from history, don't forget to subscribe.